Hey, Matt.
Hey, Mike.
We should talk about some stuff.
Yeah, we should. Maybe we should record it too for posterity.
And then maybe share it with other people on the internet.
Sure.
Hey, it's crazy enough to work. Let's do it. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Hacking the Grepson. Today, we will be talking about the first three puzzles in this year's Advent of Code 2023. So this is your spoiler alert. If you have not started it yet, or you haven't finished the first 3 days, and you don't want to be spoiled by our immaculately crafted solutions that we are going to read on the air, line by line. No, we won't be doing that unless you want that. Please send us a comment and tell us that you want us to do
It would be a little weird.
Yeah. No, we're just going to read them in binary. So it's, unless you know that inherently, it's not spoiling. Before we get into the puzzles, though, I remember that you said last time we talked about this, asking about any kinds of things that you do to potentially set up your Advent of Code environment. I use VS Code. I'm assuming you use VS Code.
Yep.
I have like a specific project folder just for Advent of Code and for each year that I've done. And I have not really gotten around to creating like a template for each day's puzzle so that I have a lot of stuff set up. I figure it out on day one and then I just copy and paste to each subsequent one, but
that's what I usually do.
Yeah, but I think this year you might have a better solution.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's better. It's different.
Okay.
I like it. So yeah, last year I had a directory I just called template, and I just would copy it to just manually. I would copy it over, or I think I'd make the day and then I'd copy everything in template. So copy template / to the new directory, but I was still making the daily directory, still copying it over. And in fact, last year I also had parts 1 and parts 2 as their own directories. So I would have like O1A and O1B, which I didn't love. So this year, I tried to automate some things because that's what I do. So I wrote a little bash script just called generate. And it does a couple things. One, you can tell it what day to generate, but if you don't tell it that, then it will figure out what day of the week it is, or what day of the month it is right now. And it pulls that out, and then it'll create that directory. But also, if that exists already, either way, it won't create it. So I put some like safeguards in there. And then it makes the directory, copies over my template into that date. I call it solution in there for reasons. And then I have a bunch of text files that I've been using for just keeping information in some of them. And then some of them are specifically the input that gets read in by my files. In the past, what I've done is I've just dumped things in through standard in, but this year I'm actually reading from the files, so I don't have to, so I can just run it all and see what it does. Which I'm finding very useful. And then because we do this podcast, I also create a little markdown file where I'm keeping my thoughts, which I think it just opens up to part 1 and part 2, and just with like blank lists underneath it. So that was my pre-Advent of Code that I did on November 30th.
Nice.
In preparation, because I was too excited. I'm like, give me the problem.
I definitely share your joy with doing this kind of thing. I spend an inordinate amount of time organizing files and folders and trying to make them, as meaningful as possible and as understandable as possible, so that when I go back to look at them later, future me understands it. And yes, automating anything, hitting a button and making the new day's workspace just appear is always a treat. The really only thing I did, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of archiving all of my solutions in a website, in a Ruby on Rails website. And one just simple thing that I'm doing with the file structure is I used to do .text day one dot text or day one input dot text or day one solution or whatever. But because of the website and because of trying to make them like, I love when I can discern as much information from the data without having to query for it. And what I mean by that
Yeah.
is, and this was something that actually Ruby on Rails taught me when I first tried to learn it many years ago, which is the don't repeat yourself kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And so that means that every day's files are one dot input, one dot test. And so if I go to make like a view that shows day X, I don't have to tell it, oh, the input is in one dot input. I just know that because of the file structure, it's going to be in one dot input. And even though day 10 hasn't come upon us yet, I know that's going to be 10 dot input and 10 dot test, that kind of thing. I wasn't really doing that before. I just wasn't really thinking about it, but making the website was like, oh, this would be so much easier. I don't need these fields. I don't need to manually put this information in. I just need to name stuff intelligently so that when I make the thing later, it knows where they are. So that's the kind of stuff I've done.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do that kind of just so that I know where things are. I have a really hard time remembering where files are or what I called them, just in general. So all of my files are the same in each day. So I've got a description.txt, which is where I just copied problem description. Input.txt is the actual like real input that's running against. Then I got sample1.txt and sample2.txt. Sometimes those end up being the same. I think today's was. And then solution.py and thoughts.markdown. But each of those is nested underneath the directory that is the day. So I've got like 01 / all those things. So I could do the same thing that you were talking about in Ruby on Rails if I was to do such a thing with my directory structure.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think, they're both valid, whatever makes sense to you. Sometimes I want to do it with the file name. Sometimes I put the files in directories. So it's like, puzzles /1/1.input, 1.test.
Oh, so you don't break it up by day. You break it up by the type of file.
Well, both.
And then inside of that. So you go the opposite directory structure from me.
It's like every day has a folder called the day it is. And then inside that folder is the day dot whatever the thing is.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's kind of a mix.
Okay, yeah. I just went with the same names every time. Partly because VS Code is nice, and if I open up like two solution.pys from 2 different days, it puts the little name of the directory they're in after it. So I can see, oh, this one's an 01 and this one's an 02.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would do exactly what you just described.
Nice.
And it's what I've done in the past.
Yeah. No,
The other thing I did is I made explicit functions for running solution 1 and running solution 2. And in my main function, I actually I go part 1 and then it runs solution 1 against sample 1 and solution 1 against input.txt. And then it does part 2 and does the same thing for sample 2 and input there. And so what that has meant is that I'm just making my life a lot easier when it goes to run everything. It just runs solution and I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Yes. No, I love that. And I might steal that kind of function thinking because, yeah, I have the same issue where, I'll start making part 1 and then I'll realize, okay, I finished that. Now I need part 2, but I still want to see part 1 because I want to see something that it does. And using your structure is good. So you kind of keep it all going no matter what part of the day you're currently working on. So I like that.
And the other part that helps there, as we talked about in the last episode with the challenges I put on myself this time, were specifically about refactoring my code as I went and not just like copy that function and paste it down here and just change the couple of things. And now I have 2 almost identical functions. I'm actually trying to do software engineering. What a concept. And so this kind of forces that because all of a sudden my samples could break.
Right. It's funny you mentioned doing that because there was a post on the subreddit today about someone saying like, why don't you guys refactor your stuff? Why do you just leave messy spaghetti unreadable code in your final answer, like, why don't you clean it up? And everybody was essentially saying, because this is just for fun, I'm never going to look at this again. I don't have the time. There's no point. It's the whole purpose of it is to run a single time, get a solution, put it in a box, and move on. And it's interesting because I see that point, but I'm definitely veering more towards you, where like I just have like a weird vanity about my code where I want to clean it up as much as I can, even if I'm the only one who's ever going to look at it. I can't help but want to refactor it in some way.
Well, something that I've heard before, it probably comes from sports, but I heard it from improv, of course, is you play the way you practice, right? So if you practice really sloppy and messy, then when you actually go to do the real show or game or whatever, you will also be sloppy and messy because you just like those are the neural pathways that you're reinforcing in your brain. If you only code drunk, for example, right, which was a problem of mine in college, then you will have more trouble figuring it out sober, and vice versa sometimes. But that's for other reasons.
Yeah.
So I am trying to get myself in the habit of doing what I should always do, because in the real world, how many times have you said, "I'll refactor that next time," and then you don't,
yeah.
because then there's another emergency and another emergency. So if you get in the habit of doing it as you go, maybe it'll be better.
So, Matt, do you want to take the first day?
Sure.
All right.
So the first day was entitled Trebuchet, which was very exciting. Actually, it was entitled Trebuchet. And so the gimmick, the story, I don't know what to call it, this year is that you are, as usual, you have to find 50 stars, right? So that the elves can do Christmas or something. You get them by solving puzzles. This year, we are trying to, what is the actual thing? Oh, we had to restore snow operations. That's what's going on this year. It's not snowing and it needs to, or something like that.
Yes.
So it starts by launching us into the sky.
Always a good start.
It's like, start there. Yeah. And to do that, the thing is, you have a document that explains how to calibrate it, and someone has scribbled all over it. And so now you need to parse this out, where this would normally be like a computer visualization problem of trying to like do OCR through, it's basically a CAPTCHA, right? But it's all in text. So you're trying to pull out the digits in part one. It's pull out the first digit and last digit in any line to form a single 2-digit number.
Yeah.
And then add all those up, and that's what you get. So like in their example, they have 1, ABC 2. So the number you'd pull out of that is 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part one. We'll talk about part two in a second. What did you think about part one?
I think part one of day one was not too bad. I know I didn't do it in the most efficient way, but I'll skip with saying that about all of these because that's generally how I approach these things. But my brute force method was essentially to just do a bunch of string splits, and essentially I kept a flag or a marker to where as soon as you found a digit, that flag was flicked so that you knew that you'd found the first number, and then I just kept going through the line, and if I found another digit, that would become the second number, and if I find another digit, that would replace it as the second number, on and on and on until you get to the end of the line, and now you have a first and a second. Put them together, read them as an integer, etc., etc.
I used regular expressions, which
now you have two problems.
Is another challenge. Another challenge I gave myself this year.
So you're intentionally trying to use regex more often? Okay.
I am, because I recognize that the problem is best solved by a regex, by any tool. I'm trying to use that tool instead of the thing I already know how to do off the top of my head.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the thing I know how to do off the top of my head is usually not efficient.
Yeah. So how did you do this with regex then?
So for part one, the regular expression was just \D, and I just did a find all.
Okay.
So Python re.find all with that regular expression would just give me every single digit in a string.
That's very good.
So I did that for
Yes.
each line, and then I just popped the first and last off, and then I added them together as I concatenated them, and then I converted that into an integer, which is not how I did part two, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But it seems like we more or less did the same thing of just find all the numbers and then use the first and last one, which, I mean, that's what the problem was.
It was not
Did you
too
run
bad.
into any problems with part one?
Yeah, no. Problem one,
Oh,
that
okay.
was pretty easy. It was part two was definitely harder.
Yeah. Yeah, my note on part one was pretty straightforward.
Yes, agreed.
Part two, I wrote hardest day 1.2 ever.
Okay, I'm glad you thought that as well, because oof.
So part two is the same problem, except it turns out that it's not just digits. Sometimes it's the actual word one or word two. So now we had to find all the digits, but the digits weren't just digits, they were digits or the words of the digits. And that was a much more difficult problem.
Yeah.
Turned out regular expressions saved me here as well. So I was glad that I did it, but I had to do some stuff I did not like in my code.
Such as, what do you mean?
Okay, so my solution here is I made a lookup table that translated the word one into the digit one, and all that all the way up to the word 9, and then I also translated the string 0, 1, 2, any of those to their digit as well. Whereas previously I was just casting them to int. I didn't end up doing that here because this way I could just do a lookup. I liked that. But it turns out that there's an issue because there's an overlap sometimes. You could have words like 1 followed by 8, but they share the E. And that works great going left to right. But when you're trying to find the last digit, if the last digit is one of those, you'll get 1 instead of 8 out of that. So that required a whole change to what I was doing. I tried several things. I spent most of my time on this one was just spent parsing it out. Learning how regular expressions worked and where they couldn't do what I wanted. Which was so what I ended up doing is I do 2 finds. I do a find and I realize I could have made this way more efficient now that I look at this.
Isn't that how it works?
I could have just done a find instead of a find all. I didn't care about anything past the first one in either case. So I reversed the string, and I also reversed my lookup table.
Oh.
So I have a lookup, and then I have a R lookup, and R lookup is like ENO goes to 1, and OW2 goes to 2. So then I just did my lookup in the reversed string.
Yeah.
And that worked. And then the way I computed the value there is I just did 10 times the first digit plus the last digit, so that I could get the thing that I needed. How did you go about solving it?
Since I didn't use regex, I augmented the original, just kind of serial looking left to right. I fell into that trap as well with the overlap on the letters, and because what I was trying to do is I went through and did a replace of like ONE to the number 1, but of course that messes up when you have the overlap. And then I found someone online who fell into the exact same trap, and they were like, "Oh, but I fixed it by doing this." And the cool trick was that I explained online is that instead of replacing ONE with the number 1, instead you just shove the number 1 inside of it, so that you essentially mark ONE as a 1, and it does, and then you can still get any words that are overlapping with the E, like 1-8 or something.
I was so mad when you pointed that when you posted that. I was like, oh, that's so smart. I wish I'd thought of it, because I thought about replacing and it would have the same problem of overlap. But yeah, all you really care about is you retain the first and last letter
Yes.
of every word.
Yes.
And just replace all the inside of it with the digit, and it works.
Yeah,
And I was like, then I could have just used my previous solution.
Right, and like I said, I did not come up with that solution, but it was so brilliant that I had to use it. Someone else also had the solution of changing any overlapping string like ONEIGHT to just add the extra letter in there so that there was no overlap. So it was really like it was definitely a push and pull of like parsing it versus preparing the data before you parsed it so that when you parsed it, it was fine. And it's one of those things that, like, in retrospect, to me, it's obvious that that's what you need to do. But when I'm in the trenches, for some reason, I get a real mental block about, like, wait a second. If I'm stuck trying to do this, I need to, get the bigger picture of, like, wait, can't I just make the data easier to read as opposed to navigating hard data? And I think that's probably a really good take home,
Yes.
like a real world take home, is that, the easier solution is not necessarily to parse data that's hard to parse, but instead make the data easier to parse. So do it on the front end, and then your logic is simple. But if you don't do the front end parsing, then your logic has to be even smarter with more edge cases and more likely to mess up.
Exactly. You remember when we were talking about P versus NP on a previous episode? I talked about how if we could solve one NP complete problem, all of the NP complete problems could be solved. And that's because any NP complete problem can be translated into another one. This is a similar thing. It's like, find the thing you can solve easily and do that.
Right.
And make the stuff that goes into that easier.
Yeah.
And I actually, that actually comes into play really heavily, I think, in day 2 for me. But I want to finish talking about day 1 real quick.
Sure.
This was where I started. This was where I decided to do cleanups and whatnot. So after I got the answer, I went back and refactored part 2. I did some post-success cleanup, as I wrote it. I changed some of my regexes from being really explicit as I'd written them down to be generated, which solved a lot of problems. So I was able to, like, have like an array of numbers, for example, and then run through that when I'm creating my regular expression, as opposed to having 2 really long regular expressions. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's what it was. I used the keys from my lookup tables to generate the regular expressions, and that solved a lot of problems. And then as those dictionaries got, they were like 20 lines long each. That was okay when it was one lookup table, but when it became 2, it was my entire screen was just the thing. And I know you just collapsed those in VS Code, and I still can't bring myself to it. So I actually collapsed them into one line. Which was still totally readable.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. And then done.
That's another topic for another time, but I think that is a great topic because I think that's, it probably could be an episode just about, like, how one uses their IDE and, like, the features that you're like, I love these features, and then other features, nope, I won't use them, and you can't change my mind. Like, let's go beyond tabs versus spaces. Let's get into the real details. So
no, but let's talk about that first. Yeah. No, I think that we'll do more Holy Wars in 2024.
Right. We'll solve all of the Holy Wars in one episode. Just knock them out.
Tell us about day 2.
Okay, let's go to day 2. So, day 2, you've been launched into the atmosphere, and you arrive on Snow Island, and you have to walk somewhere. And so, in the meantime, the elf that is accompanying you is going to say, "Hey, let's play a little game." And this game involves essentially, like, grabbing handfuls of random amounts of cubes that are colored either red, green, or blue. And, your input is essentially like a bunch of games which involve a bunch of sets of potential cubes that can be pulled out. So, like, for example, game 1 has 3 sets. The first set, he pulls out 3 blue and 4 red. Second set, 1 red, 2 green, 6 blue. And the final set, 2 green. And the first part of this is essentially like, given the statistics of a specific number of games and the sets that are in those games, if you have a bag that contains a certain number of red cubes, green cubes, and blue cubes, which of these games are possible and which of these games are impossible? So after day 1, especially day 1, 2, this one seemed a lot easier. We'll just talk about part 1 for now, but I think both parts were actually pretty straightforward, which means a lot coming from me. I mean, it was, you know, also just a lot of like string hacking, like taking the input and essentially putting it into some kind of data structure that you can then iterate over and query. So like the first part, I think I don't have my code in front of me, but it was basically like I spent most of the time just parsing the input to put it into a data
Same.
structure that I could then query by iterating over all the games and saying like, okay, if you have these games and these sets of these cubes, are any of the numbers, greater than the number of cubes that you have, and if so, then it's impossible, and if not, it's possible. So yeah, that was not too tough. What was your experience?
This was a huge pain.
Oh,
The parsing in particular
yeah.
was a huge pain. And I think the main reason was I again tried to use regular expressions, and I could not wrap my brain around how to use a regular expression here. I did eventually find a solution. Some of the people at work, we have a Slack channel for Advent of Code, as well as on the private channel that you and I are on in our other Slack server. And one of the people there had used regular expressions, and I was like, "Oh, that was way easier than I made it."
I'm glad
and
you
then I
found
just
it.
felt dumb. And the nice thing about that, as we were talking about earlier, about like looking online and getting answers and whatnot, I ended up using some of that information that I learned yesterday today. So yeah, nice things. But yeah, so I spent probably like an hour trying to get my regular expression to work, and I finally threw it out, and I just fell back on standard string manipulation using splits and strips. And then after that, it was just a matter of finding the max scene of each color in each round. It was trivial, and then once I parsed it, super easy to do it, and I knew how to parse it.
Yeah.
Like immediately, I'm like, but I didn't want to do it that way because the code's ugly. And I'm like, well, a regular expression is the right way to do this. Regular expressions are their own programming language.
Yeah. Well,
basically.
I'm curious. Like in the end, since you tried to do it the right way with a regex, but you ended up doing it the quote unquote wrong or simplistic, or I don't know how you would put using string splits and strips because I mean that's what I did too.
Less elegant.
Less elegant. Okay. Well, I think I can accept that. I mean, do you feel like you failed in some way because you had to do that?
No.
Okay.
I challenged myself to do something a certain way,
Yeah.
and I tried.
Yeah.
And then
and you succeeded
just-
in the end.
Yeah, and I did get the right answer.
Yeah.
I didn't succeed in doing it the way I wanted, but I did get the answer I wanted. And I know now if I wanted to, I could go back and fix this.
Yeah.
I was remarkably close to how I should have done it. I just misunderstood a fundamental thing about regular expressions that I'm not even sure I could put into words.
Yeah.
But I understand it now.
Like you said, regular expressions are their own topic.
It's just they're such a powerful tool,
Yeah.
and they're so hard to use. But it's like if you use Excel all day and you don't know how to do a pivot table, you probably should because pivot tables are so powerful in Excel.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then why would you ever bother to learn that? Like if I find it easier to export things out of Excel and write a program to give me the answer I want than to ever do a pivot table.
Right.
And that's because I do it so rarely.
Yeah.
And so to me, regular expressions are the place where like that's the equivalent of that for me. And I'm like, I should learn these, so I'm going to do a better job of it. And there's so many parsing problems in Advent of Code that it's just a great place to use it. What's funny is some of the folks at work are doing exactly the opposite. They're challenging themselves to not use regular expressions because they use regular expressions all the time for string parsing, and they don't do the other ways of doing it.
Interesting.
Because they are doing a ton of string parsing for what they are working on.
Yeah.
Like looking at logs and whatnot. And I'm like, oh, but it was interesting to see somebody had the exact opposite goal of me for the same problem.
That's very cool. So part 2 of this puzzle, I I don't remember having much trouble with it because once again, it was that all the parsing in part one was really the most laborious part of this. I mean, the difference in part two compared to part one is using the same input, which is a bunch of games and sets that were done in the past. It's now asking you to find the fewest number of cubes of each color that could have been in the bag, as opposed to checking as whether the amounts of cubes was above the bag of cubes that it gave you before. So yeah, this seemed like pretty much the same parsing. It's just that I essentially just had a bunch of counts, and every time blue cubes were used, I increased. If it was more than the last amount of blue cubes that were used, then I just replaced it. And so in the end, once I'd parsed all of it, I now had the minimum number of each kind that I needed to satisfy that game. And then you took a bunch of those numbers and summed them and or multiplied them. I don't know. That's how that.
You multiplied parts of it, and then you summed the result of that.
Right. Yeah. Right. The power of a set of cubes is equal to the number of red, green, and blue cubes multiplied together. So if the minimum number of red, blue, and green was 1, 2, 3, you would get 6. And then for every game, you add those all together, and then you get a final number. Because that's the thing with Advent of Code. In the end, you always have to have just a number for the answer. And so they always have to figure out some interesting way to come up with a crazy problem. But then in the end, you have to take a bunch of numbers and add them or multiply them together to get an answer. So yeah, this one seemed pretty straightforward. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. A couple of things that I wrote down as being of note when I was going through this. The first thing I did was I split out my part one solution so that parsing was its own function, and then the processing of it was its own.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing I did, and then I retested part one. So this is where that idea that I talked about earlier of like rewriting my code as I went, this is where this really started to happen. And then once I had that, it was the same exact calculation actually that I used in figuring out how many blue, red, green cubes there were on each row, was just using a max already. Like just using the max function. I already had that. And in fact, the logic became simpler here because I just took out the part where it checked to see if the goal was there.
Right.
And then after I was done figuring out all the rounds in a line, I actually, and this is something I credit with my using TypeScript more and more, is TypeScript and Python both, and JavaScript in general, all have the concepts of map, reduce, and filter on data sets, and I don't use those a lot.
Oh, I try to use them as much as possible.
But I've been using them more and more because, in particular, in the world of JavaScript and TypeScript, it's like ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it might be confusing to people reading your code in Python, especially when I was first writing Python. Those were not super popular functions. But now I'm like, oh, well, this is a reduce. Because I needed to reduce my lines down to, I needed to multiply all the three numbers together. Right. And I could have just done, red times blue times green. But I did a reduce with lambda x times y instead, partly to remind myself how to use reduces in Python so I could use them in the future, which I had to do today. So that was kind of nice. Just all around. I did find this one solution 2 was significantly easier than solution 1 just because the parsing was the problem on this one.
Yeah. I think one of the things also that it's just my own personality and how my brain works is that the sets of cubes, 1 green, 3 red, 6 blue, I just think, this is RGB. And I think of it in RGB, and it bothers me that it's not in that order. And so when I made my bag, I made sure that was RGB, and if I could make the other ones into RGB, even though there was literally no benefit to reordering them, but my brain is just no, you don't go red, blue, green. It's red, green, blue, and that's just
what's
yeah.
what's really funny about that is I also struggled with a very similar thing, but I rebelled against the RGB and
Oh.
I went alphabetical.
Oh.
I went blue,
Oh.
green, red when I was defining my structure because that made sense as the way I wrote it
Yeah.
down. Because I checked for all the blues, checked for all the greens, checked for all the reds, and so it's alphabetical and it's it flowed. But none of the examples were in that format at all,
Mhm.
uh, and so it broke my brain. And I multiple times considered swapping it around so that it would be RGB because all the examples showed us things that way.
Mhm.
And I was like, wait, okay. When I was trying to debug this one,
It's
I
it
kept having to like
it's
reverse. I
very
was like,
hard
oh yeah, okay, got it
to
right.
stop our brain from just, cuz we spend all this time learning these heuristics and structures and stereotypes about the world that it's you can't expect us to just not be pulled by that. But yeah, sometimes it's often just a time waste. So day 3. Oof. This was a grueling one for me, and I know it's because I did it the hardest, brute forcest way. But once again, that's just how my brain works. So I'm very curious to hear you read about it and what your process was in solving it, and then I will cry about mine.
So this one, day 3, turns out that the engine we needed I think it was in a gondola.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was in a gondola. The engine was missing parts, and so we had to calculate part numbers based on the input to figure out what parts to order so that he could install them, right, and get the gondola to move. And the each line basically looked like it was a series of dots, symbols, and numeric digits.
Hmm.
Where dots represented basically nothing, it was like an empty space.
Right.
Digits, contiguous digits were a number, so 467 was 467. It wasn't 4 and 6 and 7, unlike in the
Hmm.
previous days. And then any of the other symbols were like different types of parts. And
Right.
so what we had to do was find any number that was adjacent to a symbol, which is basically anything that wasn't a digit or a period.
Hmm.
And then I think we just added them all up or something. So it was a big parsing problem. Um,
Yes.
I did use regular expressions here, and they did get a workout, for sure. Um, but I like my skills in using regular expressions got to work out. But I actually learned quite a bit about that, which was neat. So what I did is I had a couple of lists that I kept track of. One was of the positions that the symbols were in,
Hmm.
that a symbol was in. I just had a list, and any symbol I encountered, I put its position in that list. And then I had a list of nums, but my numbers I actually stored as something called a grid number originally, which is a class I wrote that just to hold some of the information I needed,
Hmm.
like the y value of that because I needed to be able to create my positions there. And the main
Hmm.
reason I had grid item was so that I could do adjacent positions because I
Right.
needed to know because that was the thing. It was adjacent wasn't just up and down and left and right. It was diagonal as well.
Hmm.
So it was all of the numbers that possibly
All
surrounded
eight
it, and that was
directions.
a
Yep.
pain to deal with
Yep.
because you weren't basing it off a single cell. It spanned multiple cells if it was a multi-digit number. That was
Right.
where I ran into most of my problems. So I ended up creating a class and creating an adjacent positions method in there that would return all the positions. And then I just did an intersection basically to see if, I just checked to see if a symbol. I just iterated over the symbols and was just like, is the symbol in any of my adjacent things? Great, it's true. It's a part number.
Right.
Um, I did run into one major problem in part one, which was the way I wrote my regex for finding the symbols in particular. I missed one of the symbols. I was just very explicit about which symbols I used.
Oh,
Um,
you were putting explicit symbols as opposed to
yeah.
not a
So I said,
digit or a dot?
exactly.
Ah.
Because I don't know how to do that in regular expressions. I need to learn that. I know how to do one or the other. I don't know how to do both.
Okay.
Like I could say anything that's not a digit. I didn't know how to say anything that's not a digit or.
I think
So I'm
it's
sure
just a
there's an easy
pipe
way to do
symbol.
it. Well, that's how you say or, but I don't know how to do the not and the or.
Oh,
That was the problem. So I'm sure there's an easy way to do it,
yeah.
but I didn't. At 10 o'clock at night last night, I did not have
Yeah,
the wherewithal to do that. So I didn't,
sure.
and I missed one of the symbols, which was the forward slash. Just
Mm,
for whatever reason, I had it written down in my list of symbols, but when I wrote the regex, I missed it,
yeah.
which was just my fault. So that I spent most of my time last night was spent trying to track that down. Sample worked great. Real problem, no.
Yeah.
And
No forward slash in the
I
sample.
I went. What I ended up doing for this is I wrote a test input that that basically listed out all of the symbols with a number next to it, so I could see what symbol I missed. Because my assumption was that that's what was wrong, and then that turned out to be the case. And that ended up helping me out quite a bit. Or the way I structured my code this year helped me out a lot reading from files because it just added a line in my code that was like read from test, and then I could see all the things.
Uh-huh.
How about you?
Yeah, that actually, interestingly enough, except for the fact that, you did it OOP way and I just did it, spaghetti style, that's very similar to the way that I figured it out, except without the regex. So what I did is, yeah, I just went line by line and basically I did a check to see, because I noticed in the input that, digits can either be 1, 2, or 3 characters. And so I just used that. And I basically said, if I found a digit, then I essentially did a little, flag, said, okay, we found a number. Go to the next one. Is it also a number? Okay, keep going. Is that a number? Okay, okay. And then as soon as like I reached a non-numeric character, I was like, oh, okay, that's the end of the number. And then I, kept track of that. I kept track that that was a number. And then went, through the rest of the line, finding all the numbers. And yes, if I found a number, I would then check to see whether it had a symbol in any of the 8 directions. So I did the same kind of thing. I did, a intersection, like was there a symbol? And so that's how I was able to get part 1. But yeah, it was just a lot of time writing that engine without regex, which is doable, probably harder. But
Honestly, even
I
with the
did it.
regex, that part wasn't the adjacent positions part was not easy just because it wasn't a single cell.
Yeah.
That's really easy to do if it's one.
Yeah.
Because it's just here's 8 positions. But here it was you're gonna guaranteed have at least 8, but if you have a 2-digit number, you're actually gonna have 10.
Yeah.
If you have a 3-digit number, you
Well,
got 12.
I think the reason why this was doable is that the actual input wasn't crazy enough. It could have been crazier with like
Oh, for
more symbols next to numbers than it did. I think the way that the symbols are written in the input, at least for how I did it, which felt like brute forcing it, I was able to do it because there were not more edge cases. That's just my assumption, but regardless, I did finally get it, and I was like, all right, sweet. I figured it out. I didn't have to look anything up. I just kind of reasoned my way through it, and then I got to part 2.
Yeah. So part 2,
Yeah, it's part 2.
the gondola didn't move, basically, or moved real
Dope.
slow. It turned out that the missing part wasn't the only issue. Also, one of the gears in the engine was wrong, and so we needed to learn gear ratios. And gear ratios were if there was a star symbol, an asterisk, and it was adjacent to exactly 2 part numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So not 1 part number, not 3 part numbers, 2 exactly.
The holy hand grenade of puzzles
Exactly.
here.
And it was almost the reverse problem. So it was like find that, then look at the actual numbers. We care about the numbers here. Multiply those together. That's the gear ratio for that star, and then add all of those up.
Mm-hmm.
And this one was rough. The first word of my notes here is woof. Woof. I ended up having to refactor and rethink my logic quite a bit to get from 1 to 2 on this one, but it ended up saving me a lot of time doing that. Instead of just continuing to beat my head against the wall of trying to reuse the code exactly as it was, I met my challenge of trying to do my code cleanup, and I ended up making certain methods that I had more generic. So I had like a find num and a find symbols. I ended up combining that into find find pattern, and I just passed the regex of the thing I was looking for into that. So then I was able to use that for both things. And then I changed grid num into grid item, and so it was anything could be in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then ultimately, what finally got me to what I wanted was my main problem was I just needed to stop thinking procedurally and actually start thinking OOP style. Like I had a class, but I wasn't using it the way I always rant about how people need to use classes. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put my methods along with my data. So as soon as I added in is adjacent function, and you could pass two grid items, and it just did the adjacency for me. All the rest of my logic became super simple.
Oh, nice.
And then I just knocked it out. Almost all of that was almost all of the time I spent was either caused by my own self-imposed rules or carelessness. But when I finished, because this one was frustrating but fun at the same time, like I got a big old like serotonin, dopamine, endorphin rush
Uh-huh.
from finishing. I was like, "Yay, this is fun!" But it was midnight, and so then I was wide awake. How about you? Part two.
Yeah, so I thought a lot about I did a lot of thinking on part 2. Just because I was trying to figure out like how would I do this at all? Because I did not do the thing that you did in part 1, which was keep track of the symbols. I was only keeping track of the numbers and whether they had the symbol next to them. I did not have a list of, because I did the same thing with the coordinates. I could go to any cell, in the data, but I was not keeping track of where the symbols were, and and so I redid my original logic to start doing that, and I was doing the wrong thing initially. This was all through some hinting on the subreddit, because I was really stuck and lost on even how to approach this. But once I saw the hint about, oh, you need to keep track of the actual symbols and how they're attached to the numbers, not just is a number adjacent to one. I went back in there and I found a number, and if the once I found a number and I checked for the symbols around it, which was part 1, I also started a list of, oh, that symbol is an asterisk, that's special. And also, I made a much more complicated data structure to hold the information about what is the number that's associated with this asterisk and how many times has that asterisk been associated with a number. So that's like a counter, and that's how you know whether it's only 2, not 1, not 3. And then also the numbers that are associated with it, and then also making sure that there are no duplicates, because like on the test with my logic, I would have gotten 3 instead of 2 on the 35 in the sample, because the 3 would have found the asterisk when it looked around itself, and the 5 also would have found itself. So it would have put 35 in twice, giving me 3. And so I made sure to, deduplicate it. Or, I could have used sets, but I didn't use a set. That would have also worked.
I did use a set.
Yeah. There was just a lot of thinking about how to do this, but once I finally got the engine going where I was keeping track of the asterisk and its associated numbers, then it all just kind of came together. But it was just a lot of like head scratching and thinking and trying things to get to that point. So yeah, it was definitely a tough one for me, but so far I'm still very excited that, I was able to figure it out. And oh, another really dumb thing. Oh, this was funny. When I first ran it, I got a number on part 2. I got a number that was way too small, and it was saying, "Oh, your number's too small." And I'm like, "It's too small, but this logic, it works. What's the problem?" The problem was when I was first testing this program, I put the like run through the lines of the data in an if statement with a max number of lines, because when I'm just printing out on a display to kind of like do some error checking, I didn't want to print out all 100 lines or whatever it was in the input, because it would be too hard to look at. So I put a max in there. So it was only doing like the first 10 lines, and so I was getting a very small number. That tripped me up for like at least 20-30 minutes until I realized that I did that. So
That's really funny.
I
That happened to
really
me
I,
last year a couple of times, and that's actually why I ended up going with the route I did with my the way I organized my files this year, and I created a test
Yeah.
.txt because I also made one for part 2 because I also was too low at some point, and I was missing the case where it was either like above or below. Like there was one edge that I just kept missing. If it was right there, I would miss it.
Yeah.
And so another little test file, because otherwise I have done exactly what you did, and that's really frustrating when it turns out, oh, my own debugging got in the way.
Yeah. I mean, I really wish I was better at the correct debugging as opposed to just, print statements, console statements. It just,
Hey, it's gotten me through like 30 something years of programming.
it
at this
works.
point.
The problem is it works too well too much of the time. Like if it wasn't so effective, I wouldn't keep using it and I would learn proper like breakpoints and debugging stuff. But also like I'm so used to working in a non IDE that often either doesn't have proper debugging tools like that or like requires a plugin among many plugins and I'm like I don't know which one to choose or I don't want to learn it. It's kind of like you learning regex. Like you really have to force yourself to no, this is my constraint. I am not, that could be something I could self-impose. I'm not going to use print statements for my debugging. I'm going to put a proper debugger on this and because I've used those in the past and they are very helpful. But like, I think the only time I've used one properly was when I was doing C# programming back in .NET days, because the Visual Studio IDE definitely has debugging, like first class debugging. But VS Code, it's not quite there, and so I just don't. But
Yeah, I still don't. I would like to. I think the most important thing to know about that type of debugging is when it's going to really be useful. Because most of the time, in my experience, it's not. It's not going to get me there any faster than printing things out. It's not until I run into those like really obscure edge conditions that don't happen very often. And even then, I just put an if statement where I would put the breakpoint and say, if this happens, then print out a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. I think so much of my programming is done with scripting languages, if it's not PHP or Ruby or JavaScript. And, it's usually not like a whole insane monolith of code that's running when I just need to put a print statement in. It just works. I don't know. It just works. So I'll probably keep doing it.
The other thing I think that is a good alternative to debugging most of the time is good unit tests. If you have good unit tests, then you're pretty much set.
Also
I
bad
don't
on
have
those.
That's next year's challenge will be to put unit tests.
Okay. Yeah, next year. So I think that's pretty much day 3. It was rough. Day 1 was rough. 3 was maybe a little rougher. 2 was kind of an impasse. I don't know what this bodes for the rest of these problems, but I'm a little more worried than usual. I don't know. I don't remember the first 3 days of the previous years being this intense.
They've been very parser heavy.
Yeah.
And I think if the patterns from past years hold up, I expect we'll get a lot more problems that involve parsing. But I don't expect the type of parsing we have to do to increase significantly in difficulty. But it's almost like I always get the impression he's laying the groundwork. He's like, okay, you guys know how to do this stuff, right? This real basic stuff. Okay, now I'm going to start adding more complicated things on top.
Yeah.
I think we got to get real good with our parsing skills real fast if we're going to do well this year.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go easy on myself. If it just gets too tough, then that's fine. That's just life. But I will keep going as long as I can. So yeah, that's day 3. And that's the first 3 days of Advent of Code. Did you have any other thoughts about the long, grueling road ahead of future puzzles, Matt?
I think the main thought I've had about Advent of Code this year is that I'm going to start donating money to it because I really do get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I would like to actually start supporting them. So I'm going to start supporting them this year.
I wholly agree with that. I have given money a few times already. I haven't yet this year, but you reminded me, so I will. Yeah, I think it's an amazing service that Mr. Wastel does for Advent of Code. I mean, making these puzzles, making them as airtight as they are, having relatively few bugs, if any, it's kind of crazy. It's truly amazing.
I agree.
So thank you, Eric, for your work again this year, and I look forward to doing some more. The next one comes out in a few hours, so are you ready?
No,
Me neither.
but I will be.
Me neither. All right, cool. Well, that does it for this episode of Hacking the Grepson. Thank you for listening. There are more episodes of us talking about stuff like this online at hackingthegrepson.com. We try to put out an episode every other week on Wednesday. As I said before, this month is always a little different because Advent of Code is happening, and we like to do check-ins as much as possible. So look for more on this in the future. But until then, we now return you to your regularly scheduled lives already in progress.